Records show Spartans routinely exhibited mildly sociopathic tendencies, difficulty with socialization and verbalization.
The records show efficient behavior operating in hazardous situations. I supplied the tools to maintain that efficiency.
Do you believe the Master Chief succeeded because he was, at his core, broken?
Happy first-person shooter fandom family out there. Today, Nicholas and I are talking about everyone's favorite first-person shooter that you were all alive for and absolutely born. No one is aging in our universe. We are talking about Halo Combat Evolved.
Talking about Halo. Oh wait, I was going to try and do a Master Chief voice, but he doesn't really have a growly voice. It's more like Cortana. Cortana, yes. Where are we going?
And thus our voice actor careers will take off. No, everybody.
Yeah, not mine.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today on our Furudashi podcast episode. Like I mentioned in the super cold open, we are going to be talking about Halo. And for me, what really, really stands out about Halo is that it comes on this kind of cusp of our industry, moving out of quite literally, right? Moving out of the 90s and into the early 2000s. Halo was released in 2001.
Yep.
And a lot of us now know about Halo, and it's probably in everybody's kind of headspace as one of kind of the largest kind of franchises and the franchise that kind of put Xbox, and you could say another really huge mega corporation, in everyone's kind of gaming market. Without Halo, I really don't think that publishers like Microsoft would be as big as they are today. So you could say it was quite a worthy investment. However, interestingly and relatively enough, we're also recording this episode in July after the wake of all of those terrible, terrible publishing decisions as well.
Yeah. It feels a little weird talking about a Microsoft game. Well, not a Microsoft game, a Bungie game, but they made it specifically for Microsoft. In the context of a world where Microsoft, as much as, and in some cases more than other companies, is responsible for the rampant decimation of the games industry by focusing less on actually making games and why games are important and more on just arbitrary shareholder metrics that don't really make any sense. But I wanted to talk about Halo, and I chose probably most of the games that we ended up doing this year in our year of aesthetics, nearly over. For those of you who are interested in what we'll be talking about next month, we will be wrapping things up with me bagging on Miyazaki Hayao for an hour when we discuss Kiki's Delivery Service.
Because Lauren really wants to talk about Kiki's Delivery Service. I think what's really interesting here is that these two episodes might actually go hand in hand. First, we are talking about Halo, and we're not. I did want to mention, having been a former Microsoft employee, about how just wonderful all of those people are to work with as individuals. Just so we're clear, and that none of those individuals, right, are at fault for the larger kind of economic landscape of the games industry, but also, right, that after working on something that you put your heart and soul into, which you can really see in this original like Halo in 2001, is that nearly 25 years later, putting your heart and soul into, say, starting your own business and really throwing all of your creative, magical energy into things can sometimes lead to burnout and needing times of periods of rest and reflection. And so interestingly, perhaps next on our Patreon episode for next time, you'll be able to see what Halo and Kiki's Delivery Service have in common. And so with that kind of pitch and opening, we are now going to transition back into Halo, because I did want Nicholas to kind of look at all of our games that we could talk about, not just for like Halo's mark on our industry. You can look for that at our Patreon episode. But in this episode, look at Halo as an aesthetic. joy and a narrative joy to play. So I think that's really interesting, because that's what we should talk about instead of just emphasizing like the levels or the first person. We're actually going to talk about the total composition of Halo. So for that, Nicholas, please dive right into why you wanted to play Halo, and then how after replaying the original Halo, by the way, we did not play that nice, beautifully polished remastered version. Oh no,
we did not. We played
did not.
buggy as hell.
Yes. Okay. We played that version, the version where when you want to load into a level, sometimes the music's just going to hitch, and then the level will load when the music hitches on a separate note. Okay. And then you just wait.
Yeah.
So, we played original OG Halo circa 2001. So
it's worth noting that we played specifically the PC version. We did not play the Xbox version. Lauren, you played using controller, if I remember correctly.
I did. I played on my PC using controller. I got past level 4, and then it actually, unfortunately, did super crash out on me. So I watched the rest of the game in a beautiful remastered version, which is how I know how beautifully well done the remastered version is, for the remainder of the game, because someone basically did the full campaign, all levels, in under 5 hours. They did it just in 5 hours.
Yeah.
And that was fantastic because I basically spent like 4 hours in the first raid.
Well, because if you know the pathing already, you can skip a lot of it. It's actually pretty easy to speed run. So when I was thinking about what would be the last game that we would do this year, I was like, okay, Lauren and I don't often talk about shooters. For whatever reason. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that like we're very story focused. We like to talk about themes. We like to talk about narrative. We like to talk about voice acting and things like that. And oftentimes action games in particular don't give you a whole lot to talk about in that regard. There's a lot of gameplay stuff you can talk about, but there's not really a lot in sort of the aesthetic realm to talk about. So in my mind, I was kind of going back and forth between the original Half-Life and Halo. And without getting into some of the problems that I actually have with Half-Life, the reason why I wanted to focus on Halo is because it was this oddly like complete game. And it was a complete game at a time when sort of like total large compositional games were like, there are many like artistic components along the lines of like, cinema and whatnot, were still somewhat uncommon. And Halo, to my mind, wasn't the first necessarily to do a whole lot of things, but it was the game that sort of like cemented this as what was really going to be the trend in video games in the industry, basically up to now, to the point where you even have games that historically were like 2D or turn-based RPGs that are now moving into this sort of like more action-oriented real-time gameplay. And to my mind, the game that did that more even than Half-Life was Halo. And the reason why is because it has all of the components. There are things that I think are actually missing from Half-Life. When it came time to do a multiplayer game out of Half-Life, like that was a mod created by 2 guys. That was Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike was then later sort of like taken up by Valve and sort of like integrated into their entire like design sphere. But it was not something that when they created Half-Life, they even considered. Like they created, because of the nature of Valve as a company and the fact that they're very like on board with modding and people like using their like engine to create other things, then something that was really popular came out of it for multiplayer, but they themselves did not consider its design. And also because I think if you're looking at a seminal Valve game, that's really Half-Life 2. I don't think Half-Life is that game. So then the question for me was, what is a shooter that we can talk about in these aesthetic terms that sort of then sets the pattern for the way things became? And really, that's Halo.
And just to define the word seminal for everyone to understand is that Half-Life in a modding sense, if there was a podcast episode about modding, we would absolutely, go
100%. Yeah,
100%. However, when we're looking at, as we're using that word today in this podcast episode, and we are looking at Halo, kind of the seminality of it as a total experience or composition from a single player and what would then become a standard of multiplayer games going forward.
100%.
Halo is what we want to actually look at. decent. Continue.
So when thinking about what we mean by a total composition, you can actually go back, and if you listen to our podcast about Clair Obscur Expedition 33, we noted in that instance as well that game is not necessarily, it's pulling bits, identifiable bits from other games. Like, it's very clearly influenced. But what's important about that game is the way in which it crafts a very unique experience out of those bits. And the thing is, when I thought, there are very few games for me that sort of like live rent free in my head. And I think I could count them on one hand. And interestingly enough, Halo is one of them, because I can still to this day remember the experience that I had sitting in the basement of the Michigan League at the University of Michigan, my first year as a grad student, and how I happened to notice that on one of the public PCs in the basement, there were a bunch of games installed. One of them was Halo. And I was like, oh, hey, I've heard about this game. I'll check it out. I didn't necessarily have any interest in it prior to that. But then literally, I spent the rest of my Saturday playing that game and finishing it. And I have spent many years trying to unpack why cynical me was so captivated by this game. And I think the reason for that is because, like, it was the first person shooter I had ever played that actually seemed to conscientiously think about the subjectivity of the experience of gameplay. And in order to do that, and then going back and looking at it analytically, I realized that plays on so many levels. It plays in terms of the voice acting, which by today's standards, like, some of the voice acting will come off as a bit hokey, but by the standards of, 2001, the only game that really came close would have been Metal Gear Solid, and that's a game we'll be talking about next year, so we're not going to be talking about it now. And when it comes to sort of like the thoughtfulness when it comes to combat, especially the vehicle combat, the thoughtfulness when it comes to thinking about character relationships, the development of characters as a way to think about the characterization of, the avatar that you inhabit as the player. Because previously in first person shooters, you would have this like empty vessel. And I'll get into that later, but everything came together, and I think it's important that Halo also really seems to think of itself as being analogous to like a cinematic experience. Because in cinema is another one of those art forms that like pulls from the other arts and combines them in interesting ways. It thinks about drama. It thinks about visual design. It thinks about art. It thinks about staging. It thinks about all of these things and it thinks about sound and music. All of these things then get brought together to create this totalizing experience. And Halo for me was probably the first game that I ever played that did this.
So I think if you have a finishing thought, go ahead. Sorry.
No, and for me, it was just because I had grown up with like the boomer shooters of the 90s. Like, I knew them very, very well. To then see a game like this, it was so transformational for me, precisely because I was like, this is a turning point. Like, we have arrived at a turning point in what games are going to be. And yeah, you can get into all the crap about, like, because the thing is, like, Bungie as a company historically made games that were very much like, in fact, many of their games were ripoffs of Doom or of Wolfenstein 3D or of Quake. They weren't really originating when it came to sort of like that kind of like more tech focused, oh, isn't this fucking cool style of like first person shooter. Where they really innovated was this idea that it's like, okay, we are going to construct a world in which that you will experience through first person gameplay, but that world then now needs all of these other things to be hitting on all cylinders. And even though you could probably fault one or two of them, like I said, the voice acting is not always perfect, but the fact that they were so conscientious about that then basically created a kind of game where I think people don't even realize they look to it like almost subconsciously as the standard. Whereas Half-Life for me was very much a culmination of a moment. In other words, the direction that those 90s first-person shooters were pointing in, Half-Life was the epitome of that. Honestly, like in an ideal world, we would have 4 hours and I would talk about the dialogue between these two games. But I really want to talk about Halo because of the fact that it also then has this like real importance to me personally. And I didn't want that to get lost in the like very technical discussions.
Yeah, and we can always do another like video series, I think maybe on Half-Life versus Halo. Because for me, I came at Halo. I think I actually played. I think I played the original Halo multiplayer couch co-op, but I may have actually played Halo 2,
Yeah.
just because of the time in which Halo was released. But my first real indication and entry point into Halo as like a game was everyone's favorite series, Red versus Blue.
Yeah.
So much so that I actually attended slash I sold at the first Rooster Teeth convention that had an artist's alley. I believe that was RTX like 3, or because the first one was in their backyard, the second one was in like a small hotel, and the third one was at a convention center. And the fact that I
Yeah.
actually know this history is like super fucking bizarre to me. I'm bringing this up because we did mention, right, that Half-Life, this was a thing about modding, right?
Yeah.
But I'm reminding you of Red versus Blue, which is, for those of you who don't know, a web series or mini series that was known as a machinima, which was using Halo and its assets in a cinematic way to tell the story of Red, the faction of Red, versus the
Yeah.
faction of Blue, which was the PvP kind of mode of Halo on the famous kind of seminal, truly, when I say seminal here, I do mean globally seminally, a wonderful executed player versus player multiplayer map.
Yeah.
Anyone in the industry, even now to this day, if they tell it, so many maps in all multiplayer games across the board, not just like first person shooters, but even third person map design. Obviously because of the Warthog, but like third person map design. Blood Gulch is a seminal level. It is the level they talk about in game development programs. It is the level they talk about in multiplayer programs. And in the industry, we still consider Blood Gulch to be one of the best kind of multiplayer maps, which was then obviously also featured in Red versus Blue. It's the two factions, and it gives them a story for why they are kind of fighting against each other. And I'm not going into that today because this is not an RVB Rooster Teeth podcast. May they shut their doors last year. Rest in peace, Rooster Teeth. And I'm bringing that up because for me, players, I think all players felt a lot like how Nicholas felt as well when they first played Halo. And I know I did too, even years later, having had other titles like Half-Life 2 and other first-person shooters to look towards, is that Halo did something really fantastic in treating the entire experience as, and I say experience, and I mean the kind of the campaign, as a campaign, as a actual type of military campaign. That's where the word comes from, everyone.
Yeah.
Life. And so the military campaign, okay, that you are going on in a series of levels and a series of missions.
Well, literally chapters, like they're
literally chapters, right?
framed as chapters,
framed as chapters are a story, right? And that military campaign tells the story of a man who unfortunately lost everything, but also at least was able to save the AI. I don't know, man. Relevancy is
save the AI and the universe
and
if
the
you believe
universe.
Cortana's logic.
With Cortana's logic. And I do think that what's really interesting here is that unlike most of the other kind of first-person shooter games we had at the time, and also even to this day, people now see campaigns as a tack on, as that it's actually meant to be, this is the military game, and the development philosophy has shifted. It's not about creating a whole subjective kind of storytelling moment. It's about bombastic explosions or bombastic characters you're going to play, or about introducing anything to get people into the live service PvP. This is all about esports now, right? It's all a competition. Instead of, this is all about what is the world? What is the place in it, right? What is the universe? And I think it's that strength of world building that we actually see in Halo kind of starting to create something new. Because in that game, they did not know if it was going to be successful or not. We can obviously look at it hindsight, right? 24, almost 25 years later now, and look at ourselves and go, wow, Halo was a seminal title. But I think what's interesting is that the story of Halo is actually incredibly simple. It's incredibly tight. It's not complex. You are a military man who has a voice assistant in your head.
Who's carrying his phone with him everywhere he goes. Yeah.
Who's carrying his phone with him everywhere he goes. And it's telling you what to do in order to, right, save the universe. And also, interestingly, the reason why I say the story is interesting here is that then there is a second antagonizing force, another AI that you actually carry with you for a bit that also is telling you what to do. But this AI is a man, and men shouldn't listen to other men. Men should only listen to women. That is my subliminal messaging here. No, I'm kidding. We can go into that later.
When in game, listen to woman, don't listen to man.
Don't listen to man. When in game, okay? And I think that it's the male voice, right? So it's the male AI that suddenly is leading you towards something. And then Nicholas will talk more about this later.
Yeah.
But he's leading you to something that then Cortana comes in and is like, wait a second, no, this world has fundamental principles. And there's fundamentally something you need to do. And it's all told through, right, the objectives. So I think as we break this down for the rest of the episode and we kind of dive into this, the reason why Halo really stands out for me is that there's kind of three really big key factors. And the first is that very simple kind of framing of that cinematic kind of story, that each every mission in the military campaign is a specific level. You can actually see the Call of Duty series really come out of this really well as well. And Call of Duty still being a huge successful franchise despite everything going on. Second is that foundation of world building. While there's not a lot of it in the dialogue, there's a lot, the points that they bring up in their characterization and the dialogue have pretty much spawned everything Bungie's done since.
Yeah.
So the world building, no matter how kind of bare bones it was, but the strength of that foundation really carried to success. And I think third, now this is getting into me, eventually we'll be getting into the game development, but for me, the game development philosophy that came out of playing a game like Halo, you can really, really see that mark on the industry for me, because I had a lot of mentors kind of coming out of that 90s shooter period.
Yeah.
That directly influenced the way I think about level design and level creation.
Yeah. Actually, I want to talk about a little bit about story before we move on to sort of like the characters in the game, which I think should be a major focus here. The story is interesting to me precisely because it's drawing from a lot of these sort of like thematic tropes that were common to 90s shooters. Because for those of you who haven't played a lot of them, those games could feel really claustrophobic. They really felt like you were always kind of moving through a box and then a tunnel to the next box, then a tunnel to the next box. And sort of you're always in these like confined, tight spaces. And that like there was very minimal, I guess you could say, openness to those games. Partially because it's a hardware limitation. Like the more constrained you can keep the volume, the less resource, the less like memory you have to dedicate to each individual level. And with those early 3D engines, they were often coming up against really hard memory limits that they had to deal with. It's one of the reasons why the earliest shooters were sort of a mix of 3D and 2D at the same time. More on that in the Patreon episode. So then in this game, Halo starts out with that tight confinedness. Its tutorial section, its prologue, is very much in the vein of a Doom or a Wolfenstein 3D, where like you're moving through tight corridors, like there's very little verticality in any of that because you're moving through the ship, you're moving through the Pillar of Autumn. But then this is kind of a setup for then what you get in the first full chapter of the game, not the prologue, where now you're suddenly in this open world, this ring just out in the middle of space. And most times, whenever you can look up to the sky in this open world, you can see the rest of the ring. You can see its contours. Like literally at any point in the game, when you're outside, you can see the entire world literally in which this game takes place. And so there's this movement from sort of like the classic, like here is the tight confined space of the old school shooter, of the 90s shooter. Now we're going to move you into this more open space. And what's interesting is the game plays on that a lot by constantly putting you like back into and out of these closed spaces. And to be perfectly frank, like I don't always think it works, but the level design is also extremely tight because the way the game works is that you move essentially from the Pillar of Autumn into the ring structure, into its core, and then it moves you back out again to like the last bit of gameplay takes place on the Pillar of Autumn with one of the most iconic moments in game, which is where you have to drive the warthog through the Pillar of Autumn as it's about to self-destruct. And so you have this timer. Like, it's actually kind of hard to do. Like, it was hard for me to do the very first time I did it, but now that I know how it works, it's much easier. And so, like, there was very clearly a thought about how the level design is then contributing to a narrative through line, because you move in through these levels to the core, you're mostly fighting Covenant. But then when you move back out into the Pillar of Autumn and ultimately escape from the ring, you're mostly fighting the Flood, which are these sort of like zombie-like creatures that you get introduced to later in the game. And so rather than just the sort of like the classic level design of the first person shooter where it's like, here's some boxes, here's some demons, here's some demons that shoot at you, here's some demons that shoot at you and breathe fire, like, and it constantly escalates and escalates until you get to the end of the game.
Yeah, no, I think what's really, really interesting here too is that this is why I love talking about the story of Halo as much as I actually want to talk about it's really the game development philosophy of Halo. Is that a lot of the times when we think about how games are made now, where there's maybe 3 to 4 years of development cycle, and honestly, some games take 7, 8, 10 years to develop now at, say, such a massive scale players have come to expect. We have to remember that games used to be made in under a year, maybe 2.
Footnote,
And
Halo did actually have a long development cycle for the time. It was about 4 years.
I think that in order to get it out the door, though, it ended up getting scaled back and rushed because of the hardware constraint.
Well, yeah, because but that agreement was made with Microsoft like fairly late in the game's development.
It was made fairly late. Yeah.
Okay,
I am bringing up the I'm bringing up the dev cycle specifically because so many games now, if they had only been taken 4 years to make, let's just say we'd have a lot more games to make, like
definitely
on the market. Okay.
Yeah.
Things notwithstanding. And I think it's just because the nature of player expectations are changing so rapidly. But okay, I'm tabling that argument. I'm bringing about the dev cycle specifically because of what Nicholas has told you right there with the movement of the level design as facilitating this stronger narrative. Is that at the very end, the dev cycle had a hard date. It needed to be a launch title for Microsoft's Xbox. That means that it had to not just, back in the day, go gold, which meant it was printed on a disc and you couldn't make changes to the game after it was made on a disc.
Or cartridge. We're ecumenical here.
We are, but it was a disc. It was
usually a disc, yeah.
Okay. They then had to finish the game, set months, before it actually launched. Looking at you, all of the modern games out there. And did not have a day one patch. Looking at you, all modern games out there. And looking at me, who has worked on those games, just so we're clear. There's a mirror, and I'm holding it to myself and all of the company purses behind me. That means that the development cycle wasn't until the launch date, everyone. It was 3 to 6 months in order to pass certification, also known as cert, before it actually was launched. So while Nicholas is correct in saying it was 4 years, this kind of deadline, even if it was made very late in the development, was, hey, by the way, it's going to be a launch title, then cut that 4 years even shorter. And it cut that cycle shorter for them to now rush to the finish line for voice acting, for level design, and everything.
Yeah.
This is important to me because at the time, the 90s games were very hardware constrained by their levels and their portals. I actually can't remember the word that begins with O, but it was like portals and something else. So basically, I'm going to call it an open door. But a portal was a way that a player would enter a thing, like a loading space.
Yeah.
And it would be like a corner, or it would be like a door. And the door became a portal, like a physical portal. And that now it would deload everything behind you. You'd step through the door and it would load, everything. And that's why every single, say, corner would hitch, or every single door you would have a hitch. And you actually still have this even in games as late as early as, I don't know anymore, as Portal, the original Portal. which then did something totally different. But you have these types of hitches, even in modern games today, to be fair, because it's cheap, it's easy, it's budget friendly. And a lot of Halo's level design is really, really clever to hide this, both in its corridors that were much wider, right? But also those tight, narrow spaces.
And the
but
elevators.
As well as
they're really long elevators as
the
well.
really long elevators. But also, which was also really fun, because you could be like, oh my God, I'm on an elevator. This is new. Elevators were new back in 2001. I know elevators, wow. But also in their open world layouts as well, where things like we have things called LODs, so level of distance, right? Back in the day when LODs, it's not that they didn't exist, they were just different, were actually about potentially visible. So you would see it in the background, but it wouldn't even be there. It might be a 2D card, like an actual 2D. So when Nicholas is saying things like a mix of 2D and 3D, a mix of these different visual spaces, I'm looking at this from a cinematic perspective, because if you're at a city, if you're on a city street in New York, you know that's a full 3060 space. If you're on a set in LA that's meant to look like a city street in New York, a lot of those are just 2D cards. They're just flat buildings. There's no virtual space there. It's all a flat building. And so I think that's really important, is that Halo, and then modern video games just in general, not Halo, not just Halo, so we're clear, did this in a way that made it feel like the whole universe was there, especially with the skybox, that in modern day, we take the skybox, or the ability to see the sky, for granted. Whereas even back in the 90s, seeing a sky that was not black was very, very unique, right? Not being just inside or in an interior, very, very unique. I'm bringing all of this in it's strange. I know Nicholas is like, we're talking about story. I'm bringing all this in to show you the amount of effort and kind of holistic totality of the composition that went into telling the story of Halo, was that in order to show the cinematics, in order to tell the story that this world was bigger than just you, the shooter, is now that you are Master Chief, a character, and also that the game design philosophy, all of the micro and macro decisions that go into making you a pawn in the world, require things like you can see the halo, you see the ring. You're like, oh, it's a ring world. And we don't have to explain it in exposition. We don't have to give you a long text to read. You just look up into the sky and you're going, oh, it's a ring world because there's just a bunch of space, right? And that's it. And that's it. And then suddenly you know it, right? Oh, you're on the open world and you feel like the world is open. And then you're shoved into this like narrow mountainous passage and you're like, ah, yes, it's because they didn't load the rest of the open world. Right? And then you're shoved back through it, and then you're shoved inside. They deload the world, they reload a space. And you can really tell this more in the original Halo than you can in the remastered. Because in the remastered, they do have upgraded tech. So you're actually getting much better cutscenes. You're able to see the world in a way they probably wanted to present to you, right? In the original Halo Combat Evolved, but weren't able to because of their timeline. And so when I look at the storytelling of Halo, you really, really can't just look at the dialogue or the narrative or the beats or the campaign. You really do need to think about how the cinematography of it is not the cinematics themselves, which, while good, is actually the whole cinema of the experience of the level design and of the world itself.
Yeah, and we talked about this in regards to Clair Obscur as well, where like, because if I recall the discussion at that time, we talked about like two different sort of like philosophical approaches to level design. I think one I called like the UX approach, which is the like, how do I funnel my player through this volume in the most efficient manner possible so that they hit all the beats that I want them to hit. And then the one that we identified in Clair Obscur, which is more like, no, the level is a particular subjective experience that I want the player to have to work through. And I think Halo does this as well. Even though it is a little bit more railroady. In fact, it's actually a lot more railroady than Clair Obscur is. But its philosophy of how it's approaching these levels. Okay, actually, the elevator is a good example of this. So, you can have a really long elevator because you need time to load in this like underground level that's completely different from the overground level where you just were. But like, for example, once the flood has been introduced, and sort of like the primary way in which you deal with the flood is to like fight it so as to get through it because it can very easily overwhelm you. then you finally get to an elevator and you're like, oh, I'm finally escaping. But then the elevator you see is infested with all of the little explodey bulb guys, and they're constantly being dropped on you like face huggers and aliens. And like, it's so fascinating because it's like somebody looked at that elevator and been like, okay, we could think of this as just like, a cheap way to move the character from A to B so that way we can load in everything that we need. Or, in other words, we could look at it from the UX perspective. Or we could also think about it as like, okay, what is the player going to feel like in this confined space? What can we do to them in this confined space that will contribute to sort of like the terror that you're supposed to feel, the survival horror terror that you're supposed to feel as a result of encountering the flood? That's that extra step. That's that execution. And that's that sort of like sense of like the aesthetics of what the elevator is, rather than just like, oh, here is the functional like programming thing that we need to get out of this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what's so fascinating for me about replaying the old Halo and then watching the new Halo and just being like, oh my God, it's so much prettier and probably easier to play.
Yeah.
Is just recognizing, right, that contrast of this is to get from point A to point B. And I feel like a lot of games are like, oh, we need elevators in the game. And so this is to get from one level to the next level. And something that's really nice and tight about the Halo experience of the original, as well as watching the remastered of the original, is that your subjective interpretation of the events, there's so much put into it, like you said, Nicholas, with like the actual people dropping down, and that every single space is used. Even if you get lost in all of the Covenant's like ships and those tunnels. And I say even if because I just constantly got lost playing. Like no waypointing, nothing. I actually would get so lost that eventually Cortana's like, after a while, there will be like a little objective marker.
I think that's really brilliant to sort of like let the player have to try and figure it out first and then be like.
I also think that's brilliant. And I'm like, why? And I hate being like that curmudgeon-y person now that's like, why don't more modern games do this? It's because in a user test, you would tell me and they'd be like, I'd be like, why isn't there a waypoint? I'm so upset. But then it eventually would happen. And then I would be like, okay, thank you, Cortana, because I don't want to say that I would wait around and cheat your waypoint because quite frankly, I don't. I did try. But back in the old days, all the stupid doors looked the same. And I know that the doors you can't open are coded in red, but that's not going to stop me when you're frustrated and you've been shooting the guys. And actually, speaking of that, it actually tries to lead you through the levels by just follow the enemies. Yeah. And that used to be an old design philosophy. Yep. So now at this timestamp, I definitely want to kind of move into the design philosophy and into the characters. Because for me, the game development philosophy pervading this kind of title are just everything that was good about it has been analyzed throughout the whole industry. And I think it ultimately kind of comes down to that aesthetic and to the characters of the game. Because instead of playing yourself, right? In our notes, we call it Doom Guy. Like, you're Doom Guy. I am just Doom Guy, right? You are just Lauren, but you're also playing in Wolfenstein. You always had this identity, but you never had like a name or a character, right? Yeah. And I think that it's the characterization of Master Chief's place in this world that really reinforces now all of the game design philosophies that I kind of rattle on about. Is that, oh, you go from a small space to an arena to a small space. Yes, that was always in shooters, but this arena now has a bridge you need to activate. Follow the enemies. So it's like number one, right? Is arena has big set piece moment, right? It's also easier to get a camera in there so you can take a cinematic, right? Yeah. Second is follow the enemies. Enemies as a guiding point, right? Enemy introductions. Every level you get a new enemy introduction. And Halo doesn't do it Devil May Cry style with like the cinematic. It's just, this is a new enemy type. You get the overwhelming sense of fear and dread because you see these guys and you've kind of seen them before, but now you see a lot of them and you go, okay, shit's real, right? It's a way of using and leveraging the game design that are already in there and the systems to then tell a story. And that's what I always loved. And so I bring this up in the terms of the game development philosophy because I think in previous games, and in a lot of games now, you're still what I call the narrator. You're still the one that's going, I'm the objective. I know what's happening. I'm metagaming.
Well, yeah, because all events revolve around you.
Yeah, like all of the events are you. But in this one, it feels more like the game is doing something to you. Yeah. Right? And I think the 2U means, well, who am I in the game? And now it's, well, you are Master Chief. And now you're asking, okay, well, who is Master Chief? And you already know that he's been brought out of cryo and that he's like really powerful. And that's why you're all powerful right at the start.
Well, that's what's interesting. Okay, so go ahead.
Right. And just to wrap it up, though, is then what's really interesting, for me at least, is then you're like, okay, but are you really that powerful? Or are, right,
Yes,
you just
exactly.
another soldier? And I think that's immediately, right, very compelling for a player. And it's that hook. Not that we're saying missing it in modern games, but now with modern games, we try to go too far, I think, sometimes. Into the simplicity. So, Nicholas, talk more about that characterization and kind of help, bridging off, because I see you vigorously nodding and agreeing.
Yeah. I'm like, yes. So I'm really glad that you made the point about how like Master Chief is set up as a super soldier, but what the narrative and the gameplay reveal to you is, in fact, he is not this like omnipotent like murder hobo vagabond who can like kill the entire world through the power of a shotgun. In fact, one of the things that impressed upon me this time playing the game is how vulnerable I felt basically at all moments. Because the thing is, like, there are Covenant soldiers who can literally one-shot you if you don't deal with them right away. And they're not easy to deal with because they're those stupid big guys in the yellow armor who are sometimes like literally stealth, literally camouflaged, or in some cases like have shields that are analogous to the shield that you have as Master Chief. So they take like 700 shots to kill. And so the thing is, like, in that environment, and I especially felt this, in experiencing sort of dealing with the flood again, where like you can very easily get overwhelmed. And so the question is then, what is this saying about this character? Well, I think it's actually, maybe it's not a critique, but you can read it as kind of an implicit critique of that stoic, empty vessel, doom guy, murder hobo, precisely because the game initially presents Master Chief to you as being analogous to those figures. He is the stoic type. He is the like guy everybody looks up to. He's like, oh man, it's Master Chief. Oh, he's a Spartan. Oh my God, he's so amazing. But then the thing is, the game reveals that actually you are vulnerable. You are extremely vulnerable. And you're not just vulnerable in like a gameplay sense. It's not just that things can kill you pretty easily. You're also vulnerable in a human sense. I mean, this kind of comes out more in later like installments in the series, like sort of Master Chief's backstory and his relationship to Cortana and how that becomes complicated. But the vulnerability and the fact that like Master Chief is imperfect. And I think there is one chapter in particular that demonstrates this, which is when you finally there's this, so the second AI, the AI that's a dude and is a square, sorry, a cube rather. What is he called? 343 no, what is it called? 343 Guilty Spark. I wanted to say Genius Spark, but I think it's Guilty Spark. Anyway, so what 343 Studios is named after, in fact. When you finally get to the core and you've gotten past all the flood,
should have been called Cortana Studios. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
When you finally get to the core.
I love 343. If there's any developers from 343 out there / previous developers, I've loved all of you and I've worked with so many of you. So continue.
But it's another type. It's the cheeky AI. It's like Gladys in Portal.
It is. It's cheeky AI.
Like, yeah. And you finally get to the core, and it's worth noting that the entire time you're with 343, like Cortana is separate from you in that moment. She's not with you. She's not actually explaining what's going on. And so you arrive at the core only for Cortana to suddenly intervene and be like, you were about to eradicate all sentient life in the universe because of what you just did. So Master Chief, as a result of being the perfect murder hobo, of killing all of like the zombie flood and like, I don't know, just being a total badass, that was a fucking mistake. The game says explicitly that you did wrong. That and that you fucked up as a result, and you need to learn from that mistake.
Yeah, and I would say, like, just to be very clear, it's like, it's not so much the game tells you that you're wrong, it's that the game now creates the story over what you have been doing and repaints it in a different light because of the character of Cortana and the world that we're in, right?
Yeah.
So I want to be clear here that, like, you are told you're a super soldier, and I think Nicholas's argument here for then, but that vulnerability comes through because we have the story, the direct story, the explicit story of, dude, you made a mistake, like following this other AI. But also as a player, now suddenly that's what I'm talking about when I say you're no longer the center of the universe. You're no longer the narrator. If you were the player, you could be like, yeah, but I wanted to follow that AI. This is my choice to follow him versus you, right? Versus, no, you're not the narrator. The game is now narrating to you, creating a narrative, if you will, about your experience, about, hey, we know that for the first part of the game, before you met 343, you were doing the same stuff. And hey, after it, he's telling you that you've been doing the right thing all along because now the flood is coming, right?
Yeah.
But then suddenly, Cortana, who has not been with you and who was actually looking out for you back then, like without Cortana, you definitely would have been fucked.
Yeah.
Hold on. Actually, everything you thought you were doing, that is, while good in this context, is bad in another context. And I think that's where the storytelling and the whole narrative experience of Halo now really takes to large. Because suddenly it's not the player going like, well, no player should want to say wipe out all sentient life, but I'm just saying, right, with the stakes being as high as they were, they had to make those stakes high. So now you're going, oh, I'm not Master Chief, but I am Master Chief because what the fuck, man? Why would you have me do that, bro? I should shoot you right now. How dare you?
Yeah, exactly. Because at the same time that Master Chief is deceived, you were deceived.
You were deceived. Exactly. And that's what I'm talking about with the entire like framing and the entire characters actually, is that it's not just about having someone on the radio tell you like external forces are coming to like destroy our objective. Go to the next point. Like that's not what we mean when we're talking about these characters are giving you like telling you where to go. They're not just a GPS system. It is quite frankly someone telling you, I can't believe you did that. I know that like you've been following these objectives like you should be because you're a player, but those were the wrong objectives to be following almost. Or it was, I'm glad you went here to get me through those objectives. However, like I think that's where it really, really shines, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing that Halo as a series really latches onto, is this idea that like you come to understand who all of these characters are because of the way they interact with one another. I mean, because that's another fault of sort of like the classic first-person shooter protagonist, is that like in many ways they have no identity because you don't really get a sense of like what their place in this world is. Whereas Halo very much is like Master Chief is defined by his place in the world. Sometimes frustratingly, because I noticed that this time around that the your allies, quote unquote, are extremely dumb and are constantly shooting you because they can't get into a basic formation when they fire. They're constantly shooting you. They're constantly shooting each other. And so like your allies are a bit stupid in that regard. But what's interesting is that it creates this sense that like you as Master Chief then have to actually be thoughtful about how you interact with like the other characters in this environment, whether or not they're your enemies or your allies. Like Cortana scolding you is a reminder that like you are not the center of the universe. You are not all knowing. And in fact, you rely on her to actually make sense of what's going on. Or like at the beginning of the game, when you first land on the ring and like it's Cortana who is actually in charge. She is the one who is commanding people. She is the one telling the dropships to come and pick people up when it's safe. She is the one telling you, Master Chief, to go look for the other soldiers that have been like that are trapped in these various parts and surrounded by Covenant. You go there to help them at her behest, not because of who you are, but because of like where you fit within a total scheme of people. And so Master Chief doesn't at that point necessarily need to be like, I'm the Master Chief. Here are my primary characteristics. I'm this kind of guy. Because you learn about what kind of guy he is as a function of how he fits with others, which is so profoundly human. Like, that's the thing I was struck by this time, is like, I played this game and I was like, wow, this is like, it would be very easy to write this off as just like another Call of Duty type game where it's like, I'm an operator. I'm going into the jungles to fight the terrorists. But sorry.
No, I love that.
That's my Captain Price impression. You could take it as that, as a sort of like, I'm an operator. But that's the thing, is like Master Chief actually, while being presented like, I guess you could say in the stereotype of him as the operator, his character isn't, though. He and you especially see this as the series progresses, he is deeply troubled by the thing he was made to be. And what the series culminates in is this really interesting like argument between himself and Cortana in a later, I think it's in 5, where he has to come to grips with the fact that like he needs to stop Cortana, but at the same time he also recognizes that like Cortana has been abused in the way that he himself was abused by Dr. Halsey. Like he explicitly sees it as abuse. The thing that was done to him, turning him into a super soldier, he was abused. So when we see this like stoic character, what we're not seeing is a paragon of virtue, but we're seeing is a deeply damaged human being who wants to have a more human connection to the world around him. And the thing is, Halo in that regard, the original Halo, Combat Evolved, is a tragedy. Because in order to save the universe, they literally have to kill essentially all of the people on the ring and destroy the ring itself. And there's this tense moment at the very end before like Master Chief essentially like goes to sleep, where Cortana is trying to rationalize very frantically the actions that they have taken when she realizes that like all the people that they knew are now dead.
Yep. No,
And that's the end of the game.
That's the end of the game. No. And what's really interesting is, so very briefly here, just in case like because there are a lot of points that we have made in this episode and that we want to make in our Patreon. I think for me, the seminal ending moment of Halo comes from a developer and a subjective player perspective. And as the developer, I think what's really, really interesting here is that there is a promise in the ending dialogue lines of the game that after Cortana is like rationalizing and she's like, but it's over now. It's over. Like we did it. We never have to do this again. Right. Yeah. And then Master Chief in classic narrative developer fashion says, I think this is like, we're just getting started.
Yeah.
And like, as a player, you're going, oh yeah, because there's going to be more Halo. But let me tell you, as a game developer, I hear, yeah, the crunch only now begins.
Like, well, no, and it's I think it's actually an ambivalent ending, even though he says it in a kind of cheeky way. Because, like, yeah, I mean, you could read it as, oh yeah, okay, this is going to be a successful game, and now there's going to be 4,000 of them, or you could read it as like, no, this is the new state of affairs. This is the world we now have to deal with.
Yes. But like, I think, and that's what's really powerful about it. And that's what I'm getting at exactly, Nicholas, like exactly what you're saying is that like, we didn't know the game was going to be successful. So you're going to end it with, I think we're just getting started. And by that, you're like, please be a success. But also, it's a promise. Please pay my salary for the future. Right. And as players, that's a really great ending for you, because even if there are no more Halos, you have a promise. And that's why I say you end on the promise. But also it's that promise that comes from Master Chief also creates that tragedy, because he goes, yes, I just killed all of my friends and colleagues to get this game out the door / to destroy the ring so the flood doesn't happen and all sentient life is eradicated. And he says, we're just getting started. Like, that is not the end of his story. He knows that even as he goes back to sleep, he's going to wake back up. And I'm sure there's going to be another threat to the universe that then he's going to take. And that's a beautiful kind of cycle and circle storytelling that I really love, is that the circle is you start asleep.
Yeah.
And then you end asleep. Right? Yeah. You start out of a conflict and they only call you, right? Because they're like, well, shit, we have to wake you up so you can learn how to jump and move your camera and step on a pad. And then we have to go to sleep now that you have learned all of those things, and the people that were there with you, right, are no longer. And I think it is a beautiful tragedy. But I also think for me, that's what really makes it kind of stand out, is that we have to remember that Halo came out in 2001. The first Call of Duty came out in 2003. So when we talk about Halo creating a cinematic, forward-moving military style of gameplay, we would be absolutely remiss to not just help solidify and end that episode with you, for people on radio comms telling you where you need to go next, for characters and tragic men in these horrible wartime scenarios, right? And the amount of brotherhood, or the amount of like the protagonist, right? The idea, the whole narrative construct of you have campaigns and then you have multiplayer. And then why don't you have a multiplayer campaign? Okay, well, Battlefield tried. But, right? Like, why don't you have it? Why are there challenges and problems? And it really all did stem from Halo.
Yeah.
So with that is my ending kind of.
No, I think we should wrap
Nicholas?
it up there. I just want to
Yeah.
remind everyone that if you want to hear the rest of this conversation in which we talk more about sort of like the history of first person games, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Fudidashi. And if you sign up for $5 a month, you will not only get access to that brilliant episode, you will also get access to our now fairly massive backlog of previous Patreon episodes. So again, that's patreon.com/Fudidashi. If you would like to follow the great Lauren Ash on the mediocre social media platform Blue Sky, she is at Espresso Cat. If you would like to follow me on the mediocre platform, I am at Academicality. Say weird things at us. Tell us how much you love the podcast, and if you really do genuinely love the podcast and want to support us, but you are going through rough times right now, please rate and review us on Spotify or on iTunes. That actually really does help with getting the word out. And so with that, I would like to leave you all and say good night, good luck, and I hope that the tale of your life isn't solely about waking up to tragedy.